There's no way you don't get some crazy ideas sometimes, right? Of course you won't act on all of them, but you wish some of them would just come to life? I get you. You probably have some concept that would do the world a lot of good. You're not alone in that. There have been other bold thinkers like you. Now imagine that you're standing in a packed theater. The lights are dim, and in the middle of the stage, there's a corpse that lies under a velvet shroud. A man in a coat and wire-rimmed glasses steps forward, holding what looks like a pair of oversized tongs hooked up to an old electric generator. He announces nothing, just connects the wires and turns the crank. The body spasms with limbs jerking around and its eyes flutter open like it's waking up. The crowd screams because it looks like God was defiled and a corpse has risen. Let's explore some shocking concepts together to grow a wider perspective while getting your dose of bean-sent knowledge. That scene just now wasn't roleplay for you and I. It's the real-life work of Giovanni Aldini, a 19th century scientist with showmanship flair. He's also the nephew of Luigi Galvani, who first discovered that corpses twitch when electrocuted by testing it on frogs. That's why we call it galvanism when we apply electricity to muscles or tissue. But little Gio wanted to scale up, like all young startup founders do. Why stop at frogs when you could potentially bring a person back to life? In 1803, Aldini was given the body of a freshly executed criminal named George Forster. He was a terrible man who allegedly murdered his wife and child, so the medical college that took ownership of Forster's corpse felt it was a perfectly macabre match to give said cold meat to Aldini. Aldini connected wires from a voltaic pile, the earliest form of battery, to various points on Forster's corpse. As he applied current, the jaw clenched, the left eye popped open, and one hand curled into a partial fist. According to some historical accounts, the body even sat up slightly. The audience was on the verge of either worshipping Aldini as the second Jesus or having him executed for unholy witchcraft. But Aldini wasn't trying to freak people out as good as he was at it. He genuinely believed that electrical charges could be used to revive the recently dead, or at least restart the vital organs, which technically means his bizarre process was the inspiration for the defibrillator. But Aldini wasn't just a creepy little guy. The scientific community of the time was deeply fascinated with reanimation. The consensus was that death is closer in analogy to tipped weighing scales, not cutting a line of life short. So the difference between life and death was treated as transient, something that simply changes, not necessarily that one is the end of the other. Even Benjamin Franklin speculated on the possible uses of electricity in human medicine, but Aldini was too bold to just speculate. He believed he was changing the world for the better. He toured Europe electrocuting corpses in front of nobility, soldiers, and scientists. These weren't grim presentations in hardly lit basements either. These were sold-out spectacles like a P.T. Barnum circus show. Aldini really believed that what he was doing was world-changing and people should have been happy about it. Of course, Aldini also didn't limit himself to humans for the shows. He also electrocuted decapitated cows, sheep, and oxen. Once during a demonstration in Paris, he very much accidentally managed to trigger synchronized limb movement in a dead ox, causing a member of the audience to faint. Now to modern eyes, this seems grotesque and crass, but back then it was one of the most cutting-edge ways to explore the nervous system. Aldini's experiments laid groundwork for everything from neurology to bioelectric medicine. And yes, he was a direct influence on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which she claims she drew from real electrical experiments on the dead. And now it's funny how thin the line can be between horror and hope, because Aldini wasn't trying to raise monsters, he was trying to conquer death for mankind. That's a pursuit that has been in people's minds for almost all of history. His experiments were dramatic, flawed, and definitely ethically questionable, but they were also caring, ambitious, and grounded in sincere curiosity. And really, is there anything more understandably human for today's minds than looking at an actual decaying corpse and thinking, I can fix him? Enough of the gray flesh, let's move to gray buildings and even grayer skies. It's the 1930s in Moscow. Overcast weather, iron-hard policemen, and even harder bread because your baba's soup ran out. Soviet science was booming, and at the heart of its lack of ethics was a man named Vladimir Demikov. If Aldini inspired Frankenstein, Demikov was the source of that weird clone scene from Army of Darkness. Demikov was a surgeon with a gift for managing organs with precision. In fact, he was the pioneer of organ transplantation in mammals. Heart, lungs, liver, he had an otherworldly finesse. It was almost disturbingly beautiful, and he was driven by a vision. A future where we could replace damaged organs like car parts and extend life beyond biological limitations. But Demikov's most notorious experiments weren't about saving lives. They were about proving what could be done. Hence the two-headed dog. Sorry, this is gonna make you pretty sad. In a series of now infamous surgeries in the 1950s, Demikov grafted the upper body, that means head, shoulder, and front legs, of a small dog onto the neck of a larger host dog. And both heads were functional, blinking and drinking water. The smaller dog could even bark and lick the face of the big body it was attached to. Even with today's science, that sounds like a terrible sci-fi movie plot. The Soviet government was overwhelmingly supportive, if only for propaganda. After all, creating an entirely new life form is a pretty clear show of overwhelming power. Of course, the grafted dogs didn't live long. Most survived only a few days because of the sheer volume of health issues. Immune system rejection, blood flow complications, body waste management. I mean, the small dog was creating poop, but how's that gonna empty? Now, despite the obvious reasons to stop, Demikov kept refining the process. We're not sure if he had a goal in mind or was just avoiding execution because giving up would make the Soviet Union look like idiots. But thankfully for him, he got results beyond the weird experiment. He successfully transplanted isolated organs. Hearts were beating inside new chests, lungs were oxygenating blood, livers were filtering toxins that weren't originally theirs. In 1946, he created the world's first working artificial heart prototype, which was miles ahead of Western medicine. And he didn't work alone either. His research inspired, and probably also disturbed, a young South African surgeon named Christian Barnard, who would go on to perform the world's first successful human heart transplant in 1967. Barnard openly cited Demikov as one of his greatest influences, calling his surgical precision brilliant beyond belief. Now, I know that our view on animal rights and consent has grown a lot in the past years, but that doesn't change just how brutal these experiments were even for their time period. The animals were subjected to repeated mutilation in the process, with no thought given to their suffering. Today, most of Demikov's legacy is treated as an important point of medical ethics. He wasn't malicious, but he was so focused on what could be done that he stopped asking whether it should be. Still, some parts of Demikov's legacy have changed so many lives for the better. Organ replacements and transplants have saved millions. The boundaries he shattered made modern medicine possible, even if he used horrifying methods to get there. Now, it's easy to paint him as a villain, and in some ways he really is. But when you think about how many more lives might have been lost without his work, it's hard to hate him. Let us know in the comments below if you've had a loved one whose life was saved by an organ transplant, and please share with us how it happened. Now, after all these stories, the idea of mad science must make you think of foaming beakers, sparking wires, and messy research notes everywhere. But sometimes it's enough to just squirt nasty, concentrated bacteria into a dish and drink it. And that was the method of Barry Marshall, Australian doctor, microbiologist, and a scientific man who proved the whole medical world wrong by purposefully getting sick. Now, back in the early 1980s, stomach ulcers were treated as simply a result of stress or spicy food or even having a bad attitude. So gastroenterology as a science used to base its healing ideas on being as boring as possible. Eat bland food, don't ever let yourself get too excited, and take antacids all the time. But Barry and his pathologist partner, Robin Warren, saw that this was a completely primitive bit of guesswork on cause and effect. In their work, they noticed spiral-shaped bacteria, called Helicobacter pylori, nesting in the stomachs of ulcer patients. Now, this was weird because the stomach is supposed to be way too acidic for anything to survive there. It's like finding a snowman in a sauna according to their current knowledge. But no one believed them, which was weird since it should have been pretty easy to show it to whoever visited their gastro-care unit. It's just that the consensus from their colleagues was stubbornly ironclad. Ulcers are from stress. Bacteria couldn't possibly cause them. That would mean pharmaceutical companies and thousands of textbooks over years of research were dead wrong. Barry and Robin might as well have been saying ulcers were caused by ghosts. And since Barry was already treated as unreasonable, he tested an experiment that he knew was beyond unreasonable. In July 1984, he drank a beaker full of cultured H. pylori and started taking notes. Pretty psychotic behavior really, but it worked. Within days, he had symptoms of nausea, halitosis, and inflammation in his stomach lining. Textbook gastritis, a known precursor to ulcers. A follow-up endoscopy confirmed it. The bacteria had totally taken over his gut. Then he cured himself with antibiotics and the symptoms cleared up. To say the scientific community was floored would have been an understatement. They just watched an outback hick get sick to prove a point to them. But Barry didn't infect himself out of sheer recklessness. He did it because the medical world refused to even give him a floor to argue. Clinical trials were moving too slow, ethics boards were blocking animal testing, and he was regularly watching people either become crippled or die. So, he became the lab rat. H. pylori is now widely recognized as the cause of most peptic ulcers, and it's even linked to certain stomach cancers. Instead of a life sentence of stress management and shocky antacids, patients now receive a simple round of antibiotics. Millions of people were healing because of this. And yes, Barry Marshall won the Nobel Prize in Physiology of Medicine in 2005, along with Robin Warren. Drinking a pile of infectious sludge is one way to do it. Of course, Barry got very lucky in his experiment. He developed gastritis, but he could have developed a bleeding ulcer. He didn't fully understand what other complications H. pylori might cause. If someone tried that today, most universities would revoke their ID badge and escort them off campus. But it's not just about the ulcer cure. Barry's experiment cracked open a bigger conversation in science: how slow-moving paradigms can block new truths. This changed the overall attitude and perspective on scientific truth quite strongly. The world's smartest people now had to be ready to suddenly be totally wrong at any time, which can be difficult for an expert to accept. Mad science, it turns out, has been sensationalized in media like so many other things. It's often presented as manic thoughts or creepy environments or uncontrollable laughter. But real mad science is simply breaking norms. It comes from ambition without being anxious, through the absolute confidence that you alone are right and the world just hasn't caught up yet. Now, sometimes this leads to leaps in human progress, and other times it just hurts people, usually when there's a lack of thoughtfulness in the process. From Nikola Tesla's lonely obsession with wireless power to William Bailey's glow-in-the-dark irradiated drinking water. Stories like these are about more than esoteric people who had fantasies that may or may not have been right. They're the visions of dreamers who truly believe that it's their responsibility to convince the world of a change for the sake of developing mankind. And while it's easy to laugh at the absurdity, remember that even absurd ideas can raise excellent questions for human development. Now, the challenge is to temper that wild spark with reflection and humility, because that combination creates revolutionary thought processes. Paradoxically, to get closer to the truth and what's right, you have to believe everyone can be wrong, even yourself. But that's the secret to figuring out things you could never have imagined otherwise. So grow the habit of staying humble while you question everything, because you've only stopped growing when you stop asking. Thanks so much for watching this video. Go forth and absorb your new knowledge. We'll catch you for your next cup of coffee.